Good morning. I've picked two 19th century hymns which reflect the incredible optimism of Unitarians in that period. So let's join together in singing our opening hymn, very optimistic about the future. These things shall be. These things shall be a loftier race than e'er the world hath known shall rise, with flame of freedom in their souls and light of science in their eyes.
Good morning. Please be seated. And please join me in our recitation of the covenant and the chalice lighting. Enriched by our differences and joined together in our search for meaning, we covenant with ourselves and each other to seek truth in a spirit of love, to strive for justice, and to serve others with a joyful heart.
I invite you to greet your neighbor for a few moments.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I haven't done Zoom in a while. Church.
This should be 21 instead of 18. Okay. Can you see that?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Marva Williams. I'm your worship associate today, and I'm being joined by Chrissy Bushiger, our Director of Religious Education, and our interim minister, Roger Fritz. Please take a look at the calendar if you pick this up on your way in. On this side, there is an error. So if you go down this first column, it goes from 18 to 18. The second 18 is a 21. So please keep that in mind. The congregational meeting is on May 21st. I'm expecting to see you there. So if you're viewing this service on Zoom, please remember that you can activate closed captioning if that's helpful for you. And if you would like to talk to others after the service, there is a virtual coffee hour. Just hang on. And if you're attending this worship in person, please join us for coffee hour after the service. Please join us in our centering song.
Each Sunday, we gather together carrying whatever joys or sorrows we have on our hearts. Now is the time in this service where we can symbolically drop those joys and sorrows in the form of stones into a bowl of water. Just as the water ripples when the stone is dropped in, so our joys and sorrows ripple out through our community and are held together in love. If you're in the sanctuary, you may walk down the side aisle to drop a stone and then go back to your seat through the center aisle. If you're joining us on Zoom, you may share your joys and sorrows in the chat. All are invited to participate in this ritual. I will drop one final stone for all the joys and sorrows that are on the hearts of those who are not with us this morning.
Reverend Paul H. Beatty wrote this prayer. Paul wrote, "When my mind is still and alone with the beating of my heart, I know how much life has given me. The history of the race, friends and family, the opportunity to work, the chance to build myself. Then wells within me the urge to live more abundantly, with greater trust and joy, with more profound seriousness and earnest striving, and yet more calmly at the heart of life. Amen." Let's sing Spirit of Life. Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the move in the hand, giving light the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
The Share the Plate recipient for May is the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, which uses horticulture to advance the health and well-being of the Philadelphia region, buying land and growing gardens to help with food insecurity. PSA is working with the local Tyler Arboretum at Lucille's Garden to provide fresh food to the Media Food Bank. The Share the Plate includes the plate collections for the second Sundays of each month. Please text your offering to the number on the screen, or you may leave a donation in the box at the back of the sanctuary. And thank you so much for your support.
Today, we share our gratitude with those who have given themselves this past year as guides and mentors in the journey of faith. We will call teachers up in groups and ask that you hold your applause until all teachers have assembled. As you are called forward, please take a plant from the table as a token of our appreciation. And I just want to say that if you want to maintain your religious values, come to the service and listen to the minister preach. If you want to have an enormous impact on the lives of children, volunteer to teach in our religious education program. I call forth teachers of our Whole Lives classes.
Oh,
Nope, wrong one.
yeah.
I call forth teachers and assistants of our youngest children, preschool through first grade. We'll start with the youngest.
Mary Clinton, Melissa Nedza, Joan Pelk, Natalie Noble, Deirdre Konar, Kelly Rayfield, and John Jersika. So can you stay up here, Mary? We're going to have everybody assemble.
Thank you. I call forth teachers of the 2nd through the 7th grades.
Justin Davis, Mallory Bringen, Tom Ammon, Paul Jacobs, Christine Dole, Teresa Mayberry, Kelly Schweitzer, and Barb Ray.
I call forth teachers of our Whole Lives classes now.
Many of our Whole Lives classes are going on right now, so their teachers are teaching. They will be honored again at the 11:15 service, but I will read their names for you, and some of them are here. Seneca LeBond, Donna Harris, Russ Lorraine, Dave Demarest, Lisa Gelman, Tanya McDaniel, Lauren Kostler, Liz Small, Derek Schweitzer, Mary Fran Torpy, and Jen Goldberg.
Yay.
You're the only one who's not teaching right now.
I call forth our youth leaders.
Our youth leaders teach during the 11:15 service, so you probably won't see them, but I'm going to say their names so you know who they are. Marge Caton, Jennifer Gould, Kirsten Liu, Rachel Lundberg, and Brad Randall.
Thank you for your service to our church, our children, and our youth.
Please remain standing for a moment and accept our deepest appreciation. I ask the congregation and kids to join me in a litany of thanks to our teachers. So what you're going to say after Reverend Roger and I read our lines is, "And so we thank you." We can say that, right? And so we thank you.
When there was a need for teachers, leaders, and mentors, you came forward.
And so we thank you. On Sunday mornings, during OWL and youth events, and for teacher training, you were here. And so we thank you.
Preparing lessons, gathering supplies, being present in the classroom. You did what needed doing.
And so we thank you. Supporting spirits and tending hearts, you were an advocate for our children and youth.
And so we thank you. Giving your time, your talent, and wisdom to help grow our Unitarian Universalist values and identity.
And so we thank you. For all things great and small, for the love and dedication you have given. And so
We thank you.
Thank you again. You may be seated. We are currently recruiting for next year's teachers. You can come see me. We have some great classes that we're going to be doing next year as well. I want to do one quick reminder. If you are the parent of an OWL student, here's the schedule, because we have 34 kids graduating from OWL today in 3 different levels, which is amazing. So Our K-1 kids will graduate around 10:15 in the chapel. Most parents of K-1 are down there with them because parents are in this session, but if you are the second parent of a K-1er and you want to see their graduation, be downstairs probably a little bit before 10:15 in the chapel, which is right below this room. 10:15. Yes, that is the correct time. Our 4-5 OWL group will graduate at 10:30. So parents of 4th and 5th grade OWL be in the chapel at 10:30. And then 8th and 9th graders are graduating at 10:45 in the chapel downstairs. Just boom, boom, boom. All right. Thank you. And now it is time for our children to go to their last RE class of the year. They are all having big parties and celebrations today.
Our reading this morning was written by the Reverend Priscilla Murdoch. We gather in the shadows of a world unsure of itself, of plans for peace lost in the plague of ambition, of a planet under threat. And yet we have cause to be hopeful. Our forebears have given us an example of perseverance in the face of uncertainties, of hope in the face of difficulties. This church was gathered that they might have a place to come to be together, to share their hopes and their faith. It is today the church that they have envisioned, but with a wider vision and perhaps a wider, if not stronger, hope. The problems of the days of our founders were hazardous, but not overwhelming to a determined people. The problems we are called upon to deal with in these times are indeed difficult, but not beyond our capacities to deal with it. Our hope lies not only in the inner strength that our religion teaches us to nurture, but also in the example of those who went before us to show us the way. They built a church for us, and it is ours to hand on to our children and to their children. May the light of reason, the comfort of kindness, the depth of a growing spiritual life, the outreach of action, and the acceptance of our own goodness and potential always be our inspiration and the source of our continuing gratitude to our founders and to those who have carried the torch that we hold tight.
Thank you. At the beginning of this century, the pioneering French sociologist, actually at the beginning of the last century, the pioneer French sociologist Émile Durkheim traveled to the South Sea Islands to study religion. Then in 1912, he published a book about what he had learned. The title of the book was The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. Durkheim wrote that the aim of religion in its early development is not to tie people to God, but to connect people to each other. Religious communities form as people suffer through a crisis together. Then people create a ritual in which they reenact that crisis experience. This binds the group together into a community. Each time they act out the ritual, they relive the original, powerful, common experience. These rituals reenact a key event that formed the identity of the community. The Passover meal is an example. Annually, it reenacts the crisis of the Jews escaping Israel and traveling north to what is now, escaping Egypt and traveling north to what is now Israel. Another example is communion in Christian churches. The bread and the wine are a reenactment of the Last Supper before the crisis of Jesus' death. In some churches, they reenact the Last Supper every week. Such rituals bind people together into a strong religious community. These religious ceremonies help people connect to each other, and they're able to share the happiest and the saddest events in life with each other. Now, in our religion, we reenact the Protestant Reformation, the major movement within Western Christianity in Europe 500 years ago that posed a religious and political challenge to the Catholic Church. Claiming that everyone should have direct access to the Bible, Martin Luther designed a worship service that, besides communion, included a biblical reading. The reading was not in Latin, as was the case in the Catholic Church, but in German, the language his congregation spoke. Luther followed this reading with a lecture, explaining to the congregation what the Bible passage meant. He dressed himself in a black robe so that the congregation would associate him with university professors who at the time wore black robes when they lectured. And Luther also introduced congregational hymn singing as part of the worship service. Now, soon after the Reformation started, some people in Europe, reading the Bible for the first time, realized that Jesus was a human being. In fact, there's no reference to the Trinity in the New Testament. These folks were called Unitarians because they rejected the Trinity. This resulted in the creation of the Unitarian Church in Transylvania, then in Great Britain, and then in America. In England in about 1750, a few people came up with the idea of universal salvation, the belief that we all go to heaven. This idea traveled to America and resulted in the creation of the Universalist Church in the United States. Over time, most American Unitarian and Universalist churches stopped serving communion as part of their Sunday ritual. A few still serve communion, but not very many. However, most of our churches kept the Reformation ritual: a reading followed by an educational lecture that we now call a sermon, and congregational hymn singing. Now, Martin Luther would not like what we have done to his theology. Still, the hymn, the readings, and the sermon are a weekly ritual reenactment of the crisis of the Reformation. 500 years ago, people started to insist that they could think for themselves, not have a pope or a priest tell them what to believe. In 2023, in the ritual of our weekly worship, we reenact the affirmation that each of you have the ability and the right to think for yourselves. American Unitarian Universalists have added a new weekly ritual that comes out of the crisis of the Second World War. In April 1941, the Unitarian Service Committee had an office in Lisbon dedicated to helping rescue Europe's intellectual, academic, and political leaders who were refugees from the Nazis. Originally, the flaming chalice was a two-dimensional image that was stamped on documents created by the Unitarian Service Committee to help the refugees escape Nazi persecution on the eve of the Second World War. An artist named Hans Dolch, himself a refugee, created the design. He was working under the direction of the Unitarian Service Committee's director, Reverend Charles Joy, who believed that such a logo would make the paperwork look more official. The Service Committee adopted the flaming chalice as their emblem. Later, the Unitarian Universalist Association also embraced the flaming chalice as its symbol. By the 1980s, hundreds of Unitarian Universalist communities across Canada and the United States were lighting a chalice at the start of their Sunday worship. Now, some of you who watch Netflix may have watched a fictional story called Transatlantic about a real person named Varian Fry. What the fictional story leaves out is that from his isolated position in France, Fry relied on the Unitarian Service Committee in Lisbon to help the refugees that he sent. This office, staffed by American Unitarians, helped more than 2,000 refugees to wait in safety for visas and other necessary papers and to gain passage by sea from Lisbon. So when I watch the chalice being lit on Sunday, I remember this history. All my life, I've been interested in why we do what we do. I find the answer is often in taking history seriously. This, I think, is why so many of us are interested in genealogy. Our family histories give us a feel for who we are. In my own case, I know that my mother's German Mennonite background influenced who I am. Each of our family histories affect our thinking, our feeling in both obvious and subtle ways. Our heritage plays a role in determining what we eat, how we work, how we relax, and how we interact with others. Stories of origin are especially important. When I talk with a couple about their wedding, I ask them how they met. Now, if your parents are still living and you do not know the details about how they met, I encourage you to ask them to tell you the story. If your grandparents are still alive, ask them, how did you meet? When we understand our family history, we are better able to understand our own values. This self-knowledge increases our freedom to choose who we want to be. Back in the last century, as a young minister, I first started looking for churches to serve in the 1970s. The president of my seminary encouraged me to look at the history of the church. Look, he said, at their origin story. Often the founders established the church's identity, and the founding identity will still be important many years later. A church consultant reinforced this idea in an essay called Telling Your Pastor About the Congregation's History. He wrote that no two congregations are alike. Each has a unique mix of members and its own history. To be effective, a new minister must consider the congregation's people and history. Knowing about a congregation's past, knowing about its successes and failures, helps the minister know what kind of ministry is likely to be effective. Hearing about the leadership styles of the congregation's favorite former clergy shows the new minister what kind of a leader the congregation is looking for. Knowing about the congregation's history can help the minister identify areas where the congregation is willing to consider change, and areas in which tradition seems deeply entrenched. Now, you have an excellent history of this church on your website. It starts with these words: November 1951, 2 exploratory meetings were held to express interest in forming a new group closer to Delaware County instead of traveling to Flowertown or the Unitarian Church of Germantown. In January 1952, a third meeting continuing the exploration with the guidance from the Germantown Church and First Church Philadelphia, those present voted to become the Delaware County Liberal Religious Fellowship and to seek affiliation with the American Unitarian Association. Dick Worrall was the president for the first 2 years. However, reading the website is something we generally do all by ourselves when we're alone. To encourage a conversation about the notable events in your church history, at my request, our competent church staff has created a history wall. It is in the hallway directly below us, a long sheet of newsprint with a timeline. Some information has been filled in. However, I would like each of you to feel free to add details, use Post-it notes, include your name and the year you joined the congregation, and perhaps if you have some photos of you or you at the church, you could even add photos. And if you leave this up over the summer, when a second interim minister arrives in August, you can set aside an hour when you can look at the wall with that minister. You can tell stories about the events in the church's history. You can recall the significant things that happened in previous ministries. This historic reflection can give the new minister much information and help you reflect on your past and your vision of the future. After spending an hour or so telling stories, you might reflect on the question, what can we say about our congregation based on this review of our history? You could write down the different responses to this question and then invite each person to vote on what you think the new interim minister should consider most important. And now it's almost 10:15, so if you need to go to the graduation, the first one, I excuse you. Some things are more important than hearing the end of the sermon. This is an exercise that many ministers do as part of helping a church through a transition. I have led this exercise at church board retreats for over 40 years, and I am grateful to the staff here at this church for their work in putting up the timeline and helping make this happen here. Many congregations leave the newsprint up on a wall for several weeks after the event. Longtime members enjoy talking about their history. Newcomers learn and gain an appreciation for the congregation that they have just joined. The new minister gains a sense of the congregation's history and a good sense of the congregation's perceptions about itself. In addition, the minister has the advantage of hearing many points of view on the history of the church. You all have different memories of what happened and what's important. Talking about a congregation's history together allows the minister and the congregation to discover some important areas for their work together. In 1991, I took a 4-month sabbatical from my Evanston, Illinois congregation, and on Sunday mornings I visited the largest churches in the Chicago area, churches with 4,000 or 6,000 or even 13,000 members, not Unitarian Universalist churches. After the service, I would introduce myself and talk with people, inviting them to tell me about their church. I felt like Emil Durkheim, who traveled to the South Sea Islands to study religion. But not having the financial resources to visit Tahiti and Fiji, I explored religions in Chicago and its suburbs. One thing I discovered is that people in the churches I studied knew their church origin story. Many people could easily and happily tell me how their church started. In the churches that I have served as a settle minister, I started to use the back of the order of service to tell the origin story of Unitarianism, the origin story of Universalism, and the origin story of the church. I look for ways to teach history, such as creating timelines or writing plays about church history. I pretended once to be Martin Luther and be interviewed. I believe this teaching of history is one reason my last church grew from 300 to nearly 600 members in 9 years. People had a connection and a sense of who they were. As Emil Durkheim discovered, connecting people in a community helps if people know their story of origin. So I invite you to remember the following, or something like it. The Hungarian word Unitarius first appeared in print in 1600. The English word Unitarian first appeared in 1673. These first Unitarians used reason to argue that the Trinitarian foundation of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit was not logical. Jesus was a great human being, but not God. The word Universalist appeared in England around 1750 and was brought to America in 1770. The first Universalists believed in universal salvation. God loves all of us, and therefore all of us will go to heaven when we die. The American Unitarians and Universalists merged in 1961 to form the Unitarian Universalist Association. The chalice with the flame was first created as a symbol in 1941 to represent the Unitarian Service Committee that was helping people escape the Nazis. This church was founded in 1952 by people who wanted a liberal religious education for their children and wanted to be part of a like-minded group of religious liberals. And finally, I invite you today, it may be a little crowded because of all the children downstairs, but I invite you, before you leave today, to visit the history wall directly below us and add anything you think is important, including, this is very important, including the date you joined the church. Let's sing our closing hymn, number 139, Wonder Still, the World Shall Witness, one of the great optimistic hymns in our hymnal. would be much better, according to that hymn. Let's join together as we extinguish our chalice in our closing benediction. For those who come here seeking God, may God go with you. For those who come embracing life, may life return your affection. And for those who come to seek a path, may a way be found and the courage to take it, step by step. Blessed be.